In May of 2010, 16-year-old Kalief Browder was walking home from a party in the Bronx when he was stopped by the police and arrested for robbery. With his family unable to make the $10,000 bail, he was hauled off to one of the toughest jails in the country, Rikers Island. He would then spend the next 3 years there locked up for a crime he never committed. In June of 2013, all the charges were dropped. So why did it take over 3 years for prosecutors to determine that they didn't have a case against Kalief? Well, Kalief and his attorney, Paul Prestia, are here right now. This, to me, is stunning. This isn't the first that I've heard of any of these things, but it's rare that you hear of all of them happening to one person. We hear people wrongfully arrested. We hear people waiting too long to get sentenced. We hear people with exorbitant bails. We hear about people who don't get proper mental health treatment in prison. We hear about people who are abused by correctional officers. This has got the full story.
Mark, it's shocking, it's appalling, it's outrageous, unimaginable, unthinkable. Kalief Browder, the criminal justice system failed Kalief Browder on so many levels. He was arrested and charged for a crime as a 16-year-old boy that he did not commit. He was innocent. He was jailed for 3 years. He languished in prison for 3 years and 15 days, to be exact, while the district attorney's office violated his constitutional right to a fair and speedy trial, maliciously prosecuted him, and then ultimately they did the thing that they should have done from day one in this case. They dismissed the case.
Wow.
And most disturbing is while he was in jail, Kalief just spoke about it. He was subject to this continuous course of mental and physical abuse by these corrections officers. To such an extent, he attempted suicide on all those occasions.
So help me understand from the top. First of all, right or wrong, we understand people get arrested all the time. At the moment where they didn't have sufficient evidence, including they dismissed the charges because they didn't have sufficient evidence, how do they justify, whether we agree with them or not, how do they justify arresting him and keeping him in prison without this evidence?
My impression is that they believe maybe at the time that they had probable cause. I was a prosecutor, Mark. I'm a defense attorney. This is an incredibly weak case. It's a case completely lacking any evidence. This is based on a show-up identification, which for your viewers is quite suggestive. It usually happens. It oftentimes happens simultaneous to a 911 call, where they hold a suspect, probably against some law somewhere. Police officers surround them. The victim comes in a vehicle, and while the police lights are flashed on the suspect, the victim makes a positive identification. Now,
A lot of people look guilty when they're against the wall.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it could be an effective tool if it happens simultaneous to the crime. If I walk out of here and somebody takes my briefcase and I call the police and say I was mugged by a Caucasian guy who's 6'2", goatee, bald, red shirt, green pants, and yellow sneakers, and a block away they detain him and he's got my briefcase and he's wearing a red shirt, whatever I told you, yellow shirt, green sneakers, then hey, yeah, that's a great case. However, that wasn't the case here. He was arrested on May 15, 2010. That's when the identification took place. Now, I reviewed the paperwork from the criminal file, and there are inconsistencies with when this alleged crime actually happened. In the criminal complaint, it was alleged that the robbery took place on May 2nd, 2010. In another police report, it's alleged that it was May 8th, 2010. So right there, you have that inconsistency from the victim. Was it May 2nd? Was it May 8th? That should already raise a red flag in the district attorney's, in the prosecutor's mind. Now, on top of that, this victim, it turns out, again, from what I discerned in the file, never, whether it was May 2nd or May 8th of 2010, this victim never called 911 on May 2nd or May 8th. The first time he reported the robbery was on May 15th, when Kalief was arrested. So let me ask you this, Mark. If you were the victim of a violent crime, don't you think you and most of your viewers would have called 911 on the date that it happened?
Well, what's the argument from the person who made the complaint, that they were just walking down the street and saw Kalief and then therefore made the decision to notify police?
That I couldn't tell you. That I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
All that I know is that he alleged that he was robbed a week or 2 weeks ago. But my point here is, Mark, going back to the prosecutor's perspective, knowing that you have this this credibility issue with the victim. It warranted putting kalief in a lineup, in a police-arranged lineup, in a precinct that night or the next day, a week later, even a month later. The district attorney could have ordered a lineup to see whether the identification was legitimate or not. We know now they had ample opportunity to put him in that lineup.
Clearly.
And that's an understatement.
Nothing short of time.
So that's one big issue, obviously, with the arrest
Here's
itself.
my big issue that shocked me, because it speaks to a broader issue of criminal justice and poverty, and that is police bail. Your bail was $10,000.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. There was no alleged gun in this. This wasn't an alleged rape. This wasn't murder. $10,000 bail. Why was the bail so high?
I can't speak to that.
I mean,
I wasn't at the arraignment.
Let me ask a different question. Typically, what is the determining factor in setting a bail at X number or X times 10? You know what I mean? How do they determine?
Well, it's pretty subjective. It usually depends on the judge who's setting the bail. They do consider certain factors when setting bail: risk of flight, strength of the case, prior record. None of which really made sense here. I mean, the bail seems high to me, of course, but I can't tell you what that judge was thinking or why the judge set bail that high.
For the record, we reached out to the Bronx DA's office for comment on all of this. We received absolutely no response in regards to why it took 3 years for kalief's case to be dismissed, which is key for me, right? You talk about malicious prosecution. I can't speak to whether it was malicious or not. What I do know is that 3 years is an odd amount of time for a case like this to be dropped. This wasn't the Kennedy assassination, right? This wasn't a complicated network of drug dealers where we had to figure out who was at the top of the food chain. This wasn't a serial killer where we were trying to still find bodies. This was one case, one allegation, one witness. Why does it take 3 years to deal with this at all?
That's a great question, Mark. It could have been done. This case could have been tried in a day or two.
What's a normal amount of time, though? Because a day or two is probably not a normal amount of time. What's a reasonable amount of time?
No, well, I meant to actually have
you mean actually try? Yeah.
Right. I mean, a reasonable amount of time. That the speedy trial law for a felony in New York, in the state of New York, is 6 months. They're supposed to be ready for trial within 6 months of the arraignment. Now, there are certain exclusions to that, which come into play and which can prolong the case.
Was this one of them? Did they invoke one of those exceptions?
Well, there are standard ones that happen on a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
The request for discovery, any rulings on any motions, maybe a possible plea conference. But in this case, it's clear to me, at least, that the district attorney circumvented these speedy trial laws and delayed this case in the hopes that, because at some point, probably from the beginning, again, I'm speculating a little bit, but probably from the beginning, they knew it was a weak case,
Right.
A case completely lacking evidence, a case that if it had gone to trial, kalief probably would have been acquitted in 5 minutes, to be honest with you. So what they did was delay the case, and as you said earlier, in the hopes that this desperate young man, who would do anything to get out of jail, this desperate young innocent man, would plead guilty to a crime he did not commit, just to go home to his family, and they can get this case out of their file.
What did they get for that?
And they tried to squeeze him, and it didn't work, unfortunately for them.
Yeah, but what do they get for that? Why would they do that as opposed to dropping the case?
I can't. I mean, I know they should have.
Right.
I know they should have.
I mean, I don't know if it's crime stat. I'm just trying to. I'm trying to be fair here and imagine why. Because the DA would say, why would we do that if we know the guy didn't do it? We'll just let him go. We don't get any bonus points for keeping him in jail.
Well, they don't necessarily think that way. They part of it perhaps is political, that they need their statistics and they need their conviction rate up. They're not inclined to just dismiss a case.
What can be done to at least hold somebody accountable for what's happening?
We filed a complaint. We filed a lawsuit in Supreme Court, Bronx County. We believe we can prove all of our allegations for the wrongful arrest, malicious prosecution. We allege several constitutional violations, and that's our recourse right now. Obviously, we want to make kalief whole to the extent that we can financially, but I'm not here to tell you how much that is. We want to make sure that somebody's responsible, namely the city and its agencies. And ideally, in an ideal world, some changes will be made to the system so that this doesn't happen again. Because it does happen. Never to this extent as I've seen it, but it does happen more often than you think.
And obviously, we don't have any criticism for somebody who makes a different decision about this. There are many people who have family and children. They need to get home to them, and they might make a different decision